The bank official didn't raise his voice when he asked me to step into the glass room. He didn't need to. The way he locked the door behind us already told me this conversation wasn't optional. I noticed small details first, how his tie was slightly crooked, how the security guard outside avoided eye contact, how the digital clock above the counter ticked louder than it should have. I've always noticed details when something important is about to break. Panic announces itself loudly. Real danger moves quietly. There's been a formal restriction placed on your accounts, he said, sliding a thin folder across the table. Temporary, he added, the way people add soft words to hard truths. I didn't touch the folder yet. I had learned years ago that once you open something official, it opens you back. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. Based on what authority? He paused, just long enough to choose his phrasing carefully. A custodial financial incapacity review, he said. Filed last week. It requires us to suspend access until verification is complete. The room felt smaller after that. Not because of fear, because of compression. Like the world had quietly decided to press in on me from all sides at once. Incapacity, I repeated. I smiled faintly, not because it was funny, but because disbelief sometimes looks like politeness. He nodded. Concerns were raised about judgment stability. Documentation was provided. Multiple sources. Multiple sources. That was the phrase that stayed with me. I finally opened the folder. Inside were copies, not originals, of medical summaries I didn't recognize, employment communications taken out of context, and a sworn statement claiming I had recently shown erratic decision-making inconsistent with parental responsibility. Parental responsibility. My hand tightened for a moment before I relaxed it again. Control is something you practice, not something you feel. I thought of my daughter's backpack sitting by the door at home, still zipped from the morning. I thought of how she had waved without looking back, confident I'd be there when school ended. I didn't ask the official to explain further. People like him don't explain. They execute. When will this be resolved? I asked. He gave me the look professionals reserve for situations that are technically reversible but practically damaging. That depends on how quickly the reviewing authority is satisfied, he said. And whether further concerns arise. Further concerns always arise when someone wants them to. Outside the bank, the air felt sharper. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the city move around me as if nothing had happened. Cars passed. Phones rang. Somewhere, someone laughed. Systems don't pause for personal emergencies. I didn't call anyone right away. Calling is reactive. I went home instead and opened my laptop. That night, I didn't search for answers. I searched for patterns. The restriction wasn't isolated. A soft credit inquiry had been logged 3 weeks earlier. A background verification request had touched my employment records. An anonymous inquiry had been made into my parental custody file, flagged, but not yet escalated. None of it was loud. None of it illegal on its own. Together, it formed something deliberate. This wasn't an emotional attack. It was procedural. I sat at the kitchen table long after the house went quiet, reading timestamps and headers instead of words. Whoever had done this understood systems, how they respond to documentation, not outrage. How authority doesn't ask whether something feels fair, only whether it's formatted correctly. Around midnight, I felt the first real crack, not panic, but exhaustion. The kind that settles behind your eyes and asks how much more attention you can afford to give before something else gets neglected. I rested my forehead against the table for exactly 3 breaths, then straightened. Indulgence had to be rationed. The next morning, I requested my full credit report. Not because I expected answers, but because silence often leaves fingerprints. They were there. A series of inquiries routed through intermediary services. All legitimate. All spaced just far enough apart to avoid triggering alerts. Someone had been patient. Careful. Someone who knew me well enough to predict where I wouldn't look first. I didn't name that thought yet. Naming it too early would simplify things. And simplicity is comforting, but dangerous. At work, my access credentials were delayed. Not revoked. Delayed. HR apologized twice and blamed verification overlap. They used words like alignment and compliance. I used my lunch break to download internal policy manuals instead of eating. By the 3rd day, a letter arrived by registered mail. Concerned party statement. That was the heading. It outlined worries about my recent decision patterns, my emotional consistency, my capacity to manage complex responsibilities while parenting alone. The language was neutral. The intent was surgical. I read it twice before realizing what disturbed me most wasn't the accusation. It was the familiarity. The examples weren't random. They were curated moments, selectively framed. Things only someone close would think to weaponize. That night, after my daughter fell asleep, I stood in her doorway longer than usual. She was sprawled sideways, one sock missing, breathing evenly. For a moment, the thought crossed my mind that systems could move faster than love if left unattended. I closed the door quietly and opened my laptop again. Metadata tells stories people forget they're telling. File paths. Creation dates. Editing histories. The statement had been revised 14 times. Always between 9 o'clock and 11:30 p.m. Always from the same device family. Always saved under a personal naming convention, not a legal one. Still, I didn't confront anyone. Confrontation gives the other side information. I needed leverage, not relief. Instead, I scheduled consultations, quiet ones. Financial compliance. Family law. Digital forensics. I didn't tell them my theory. I gave them facts and watched what questions they asked back. Good professionals reveal priorities by what they don't dismiss. One of them finally said, "This reads like someone preparing the ground, not executing the strike." That was when I allowed myself to name it. The realization didn't hurt the way betrayal usually does. It settled colder than that. The person behind this had always been good at patience, at letting processes do the damage so their hands stayed clean. By the end of the week, another notice arrived, this one requesting a voluntary psychological evaluation, framed as a supportive measure. Support is what systems call pressure when it needs consent to proceed faster. I didn't respond. I was no longer trying to stop what was happening. I was letting it fully expose itself. Because once a system commits, it documents everything. And documentation, when traced properly, doesn't care about intentions. It cares about origins. And someone had forgotten that. The morning sunlight filtered softly across my living room, catching the dust motes in its golden beams. I sat at the edge of my couch, fingers tracing the rim of my coffee mug, my eyes fixed on the blinking cursor of my laptop. Yesterday's bank calls still echoed sharply. "Your account is under review. Access suspended pending verification." Each word hung in the air like a threat, precise and cold. My sister Emily had always been meticulous, patient, impossibly strategic. That this moment tied directly to her wasn't a revelation, it was confirmation. I opened the laptop fully, scanning emails, flagged documents, and encrypted messages. At first, the layers of information were intimidating, but I quickly sorted them into actionable categories. Panic was not an option. I had never needed to shout or plead to get results. Intelligence and patience were far more effective. Flashback, a year ago, Emily had insisted on managing my trust fund left by our late grandfather. "It'll be easier if I handle this," she said, voice smooth, persuasive. Subtle alarms had appeared almost immediately. Delayed approvals, unusual dual signature requests, and vague excuses about internal auditing complexities. I had ignored them, trusting family over logic, a costly mistake. Now I traced every transaction, every timestamp, every signature she had touched. Hidden transfers, totaling $14,625 over 3 months, were buried in intermediaries. Individually, plausible. Together, a pattern. Each piece fed into a chain of procedural deceit, silent but deliberate. I picked up the phone and called Karen Mitchell, my lawyer. "Karen," I said evenly, placing the call on speakerphone, "initiate a full forensic audit on every transaction handled by Emily. I need anomalies flagged, dates and approvals mapped, all correspondence cross-checked." Her pause was brief. Then a warning, sharper than before. "If this goes unresolved, there's risk to family court filings and custody implications." She may already be maneuvering strategically. That line, precise and frightening, crystallized the stakes. I nodded internally. Good. The pressure had escalated exactly where it needed to be. Hours passed. Each document, printed and labeled, became a puzzle piece. Notarized contracts, waiver forms, email headers, internal memos, audit trails. Metadata timestamps revealed sequences Emily had assumed were invisible. I mapped every irregularity on my laptop, cross-referencing with bank reports and past communications. Emily texted mid-afternoon, We need to talk. It's urgent. I let the phone sit, letting her urgency reinforce her miscalculation. My reply, later. I'm reviewing some documents. Timing always was critical. I didn't need to chase her. The system itself would begin revealing her errors. By late afternoon, I had uncovered a waiver she had made me sign 2 months prior, hidden in dense boilerplate language, giving her unilateral control over certain accounts. She had assumed compliance. She had assumed trust. That small oversight would now become her undoing. Evening brought shadows creeping across the floor, yet I felt the tiniest thrill of methodical anticipation. I moved to my daughter's room, watching her sleep soundly. Her small hands clutched a blanket, a silent anchor for every decision I would make. Protecting her future was non-negotiable. My strategic moves weren't about revenge, they were about safeguarding what mattered most. Back at my desk, I uncovered communications between Emily and a supposed financial advisor. Contradictions in promised audits, unauthorized transfers, and backdated approvals appeared clear. Each thread, each micro-twist she had orchestrated, was now tangible and documented. Night fell. The room quieted, but my mind was alive with possibilities. I drafted a timeline of Emily's manipulations, hidden accounts, waived access, delayed transfers. Each point was precisely documented, quantified in exact dollar amounts, with supporting evidence ready for court if necessary. I double-checked the forensic audit results arriving from Karen. Anomalies confirmed. Yet, no celebration. Every confirmation was merely a step in the chain. Timing remained critical. Every move needed subtlety, patience, precision. By midnight, a micro-twist emerged, a hidden email thread suggesting Emily had attempted to recruit an outside family member as an ally. That thread now became leverage. I archived it, ready to expose quietly, legally, and decisively. The procedural rhythm continued, document verification, cross-referencing, mapping patterns. My mind constantly anticipated Emily's reactions, each potential lie, each assumption of ignorance. The slow burn preparation was now structured, almost surgical in precision. As the first hint of dawn crept across the room, I organized the next folder. Internal communications flagged for inconsistencies. Each item highlighted inconsistencies, delays, and unauthorized signatures. Every human error, every assumption, every silent move by Emily was now in plain sight. I closed my laptop briefly, sensing the subtle shift. The web Emily had woven was now ready to begin unraveling. Calm, calculated anticipation replaced passive concern. Each paper, each timestamp, each silent piece of preparation would speak louder than shouting ever could. The first move had been made. Emily's procedural traps were systematically recorded, analyzed, and ready for exposure. The system itself would act as my ally, revealing her manipulations without theatrics. Every micro-twist she had planted was now a tool for her eventual, inevitable collapse. Tomorrow promised more challenges, calls, filings, confirmations. But I was ready. Every detail accounted for. Every action purposeful. Every silence, every wait, every observation formed a pattern she could not predict. And in this quiet orchestration, the first seeds of justice were planted. The night ended not with triumph, but with a controlled awareness of power. The calm before the storm was not fear, it was mastery. Every move, every micro-twist, every piece of paper placed me closer to inevitable, calculated justice. Emily would learn soon enough. Patience and intelligence always outweigh impulse. The office smelled faintly of printer toner and stale coffee, the fluorescent lights flickering ever so slightly as I stepped into the narrow corridor. My heart did not race. My pulse did not spike. Calm, observant, analytical, every muscle prepared, every thought organized. The assistant looked up nervously, eyes darting to the locked file cabinet behind her, and whispered, "You're not supposed to see this yet." The words barely registered. I simply nodded and continued, letting the sense of authority and secrecy settle over me. My sister, Emily, had orchestrated this chain of surveillance with a precision I could not ignore. But I had patience, and patience always pays dividends. Minutes stretched into a measured rhythm as I sifted through the stacks of documents, each stamped and initialed, each bearing metadata timestamps that told their own story. Employment contracts, credit authorizations, notarized waivers, audit trails. I cataloged each silently, letting the quiet hum of the office accentuate the gravity of discovery. The numbers were exact: $14,625 redirected without authorization, dual signature thresholds bypassed subtly, and every step recorded meticulously. It was the kind of calculated procedural betrayal that could dismantle someone piece by piece, yet I remained composed. Protecting my daughter, shielding her future, this was my anchor, my focus. Not revenge yet, only preparation. I recalled evenings with Emily before the subtle fracture had begun. We had shared coffee at the same downtown cafe, chatting about investments, mortgages, life's small victories. She had always been a step ahead, patient, meticulous, and impossibly strategic. At the time, I admired her composure. I never could have imagined she would weaponize it against me. The realization did not ignite panic, it crystallized a strategy. Every past smile, every shared confidence now carried the shadow of calculation. And as I traced her steps through this digital and financial maze, I saw the gaps she had left, those tiny inconsistencies that even her meticulousness could not fully conceal. By late afternoon, the city's hum had dimmed into a quiet backdrop, the soft glow of the setting sun casting elongated shadows across the office floor. I reviewed the forensic audit report once again, confirming figures and dates with an unwavering eye. Metadata indicated covert transfers, hidden liabilities, and one falsified identity that could unravel her entire scheme if exposed in the right courtroom setting. I made a note. The waiver she had forced me to sign, a simple line: I acknowledge financial oversight could be leveraged if aligned with the audit evidence. Subtle, procedural, yet potentially devastating. Each file I touched became a calculated piece of the puzzle, and I was patient enough to wait for the precise moment to reveal it. During a brief interlude, I spoke softly to my daughter, who had joined me in the study, her small hands clutching a worn notebook. "We're just being careful, sweetie," I murmured. She nodded, sensing the calm control I maintained, and returned to her sketches. That small interaction was more than comfort. It was a reinforcement of why this meticulous planning mattered. Every document, every timestamp, every procedural oversight now carried the weight of not just justice, but protection, a legacy of vigilance over emotion. Hours passed in a quiet cadence. Emails were cross-referenced, digital logs compared, metadata timelines layered over financial reports. Emily's subtle betrayals began to emerge in clusters: small purchases misattributed, transfers slightly delayed, communications marked internal that were anything but. The pattern revealed a methodical approach, one she assumed I would overlook because I am always calm, never reactive. But calm is deceptive. It masks the collection, the analysis, and the orchestration. I knew what she underestimated: my patience. My ability to let the system itself become the instrument of consequence. At precisely 7:43 p.m., I dialed my lawyer, Karen Mitchell, whose office smelled faintly of polished mahogany and leather-bound binders. "Karen," I said evenly, "I have something you need to see. It's time we prepare the submission for the federal audit. And yes, this involves hidden liabilities, misdirected funds, and procedural bypasses that will surprise them." Karen's initial pause, a professional acknowledgement of risk, told me I had the leverage I needed. No emotional outburst, no hysteria, just controlled delivery, letting the weight of reality press without panic. By nightfall, the city's skyline reflected orange and amber over my apartment windows, a quiet contrast to the storm of preparation inside. Emily would not know the precise moment her own procedural arrogance would collapse until it was too late. Each file, each cross-reference, each time-stamped transaction was a micro-twist, building toward the chain of revelations that could dismantle the meticulous house of cards she had constructed. And as I stacked the documents for final review, I felt no triumph, only anticipation. Controlled, patient, strategic anticipation. The evening was punctuated by a single call from the financial institution, a low, tremulous voice, confirming the irregularities I had already documented. "Ma'am, we've reviewed the metadata," and their hesitation spoke louder than words. I remained silent, letting the authority of facts and procedural missteps carry the weight. Micro-twists were accumulating: the hidden debt, the falsified signature, the dual account irregularities, all converging into a chain reaction waiting to be released. By midnight, my daughter asleep, the apartment quiet except for the faint hum of my laptop, I cataloged the final set of documents. Each micro-twist in place, each procedural leverage accounted for, each authority ally briefed and ready. I leaned back, observing the quiet city lights and reflecting. Strategy had replaced emotion, patience had replaced panic, and the slow-burn orchestration of justice was in motion. I was prepared for the next step, knowing full well the cascade of consequences awaiting Emily, yet carrying none of the drama or theatrics typical of revenge. The night ended not with celebration, but with resolution, a calm, controlled energy that spoke louder than any shout. I didn't need to scream. The system would do the speaking. And for the first time, in this quiet moment, I understood that patience, observation, and meticulous orchestration could wield more power than any emotional outburst. Justice, procedural and precise, was silently aligning itself, and I would ensure that every consequence would unfold naturally, leaving no trace of my own fingerprints, only the undeniable exposure of Emily's carefully constructed deceptions. I stepped into my apartment, the faint hum of the city outside echoing in the silence. The soft glow of my laptop screen was the only light, casting shadows across the meticulous piles of documents I had arranged over the past weeks. Emily's reach had grown more brazen, her subtle manipulations now escalating into calculated threats. I knew this was no longer just a familial power struggle, it was a carefully orchestrated attempt to dismantle everything I had worked for. Earlier that morning, I had met with Detective Lawrence, the only authority I trusted beyond my lawyer. His hands trembled slightly as he handed me the file, the weight of the information inside enough to freeze the room's temperature. "If she discovers you found this, it could change everything," he said, lowering his voice so only I could hear. His warning wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. One line, one glance, and the chill of reality seeped into my bones. My daughter's future, my life's work, all teetering on a thread I couldn't see. I leaned back, letting the tension settle in my shoulders. Calm was my only weapon. Panic, I reminded myself, was a luxury I couldn't afford. Every interaction, every document, every subtle clue Emily had left behind became part of a larger map I was silently piecing together. The coffee on my desk had gone cold hours ago, but I didn't notice. My focus sharpened with each passing moment, each metadata timestamp and notarized signature whispering secrets that Emily had assumed were invisible. Flashbacks of past interactions came unbidden. At family gatherings, she had been the picture of generosity, the sister everyone trusted, laughing easily, offering help that always came with invisible strings. Subtle red flags, tiny financial accidents that no one noticed at first, but that I had cataloged meticulously. $7,500 missing here. A suspicious wire transfer there. Each incident alone might have seemed innocent, but together, they painted a map of strategy and malice. I opened my encrypted folder, revealing contracts, emails, and bank statements that Emily had left under the guise of normalcy. Each document was a weapon in my hands, a silent testament to her overconfidence. I noted the dual signature requirements she had tried to bypass, the fake approvals she had left unsecured. Emily had underestimated the one thing she never could control, my patience. Hours slipped past unnoticed. Every click of the mouse, every printed page, every line highlighted was a piece of the puzzle. I called my lawyer, Karen Mitchell, who had become my anchor in this storm. Her voice, steady yet charged with concern, reminded me that time was not my ally. If she accelerates her filings before we act, she warned, this could all spiral into family court disaster. Her words were measured, calculated, like mine. I didn't flinch. I wasn't overwhelmed. Strategy always preceded execution. By mid-afternoon, I had set the stage for a confrontation that would feel inevitable. I had arranged for Emily to visit the office under the pretense of a routine financial review. She entered, confident and composed, her smile hiding the predator beneath. I greeted her with controlled warmth, my eyes masking the storm of evidence quietly gathering in my hands. Each folder, each annotated page, each meticulously verified statement was a thread of her unraveling. The first micro-twist came when Emily discovered the ledger I had prepared. Her composed expression faltered for a fraction of a second, enough for me to see her arrogance crack. I remained silent, allowing her to stew in the unease she had never before felt. Every subtle glance, every hesitation, became a weapon. She didn't yet realize that the documents were cross-referenced, double-checked, and ready for submission to the authorities. I could feel the slow collapse of her plan. The false allies she had relied upon, friends, colleagues, even distant family members, were now turning under subtle pressure. Their loyalty, once assumed, was now vulnerable to the quiet exposure of her overreach. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I orchestrated. Each interaction, each strategically placed document, ensured that her own procedural arrogance became her undoing. Late evening brought the culmination of the day's work. I reviewed my daughter's security measures, my financial accounts, and the carefully crafted chain of evidence that would leave no room for Emily to maneuver. I allowed myself a moment of relief, a quiet acknowledgement that control was shifting. The chain of micro-twists was set, the stage prepared for the ultimate reveal, where procedural justice would quietly, immutably, assert itself. As night fell, I reflected on the journey. Each subtle red flag Emily had left behind, each calculated maneuver she thought would go unnoticed, now contributed to her slow, methodical exposure. I did not rejoice in vengeance. I understood it as a patient, intelligent response to injustice. My daughter's future, my peace, my dignity were now shielded by the very system Emily had tried to exploit. Before leaving the office, I sent a final encrypted email to my lawyer, attaching the cross-referenced documentation. "Ready for the next step," I wrote. It was calm, simple, yet heavy with implication. No drama, no shouting, just the quiet assertion of control that had guided me from the beginning. That night, I held my daughter close, feeling her rhythmic breathing against my chest. The city outside hummed, oblivious to the quiet battles fought in locked offices, in encrypted files, in carefully annotated evidence. I didn't need applause. I didn't need recognition. This was the victory that mattered: safety, dignity, and freedom, earned not through force, but through patience, intellect, and unwavering strategy. I allowed myself one final, quiet smile. Emily's plans had been meticulously deconstructed, one micro-twist at a time. Tomorrow, the next stage of resolution would unfold, predictable yet inevitable, as procedural justice quietly prevailed. I wasn't rich. I wasn't celebrated. I was free, and that was enough. I still remember the metallic scent of the office when Detective Lawrence slid the thick folder across the mahogany desk. His hands trembled as he closed the file, and the quiet click of the lock on the door echoed through the empty room. "If this ever gets into the wrong hands," he murmured, voice low and urgent, "everything you've worked for, it could all vanish." I didn't ask him to repeat it. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. My daughter's future, my life, my carefully constructed strategy, everything hinged on my next move. Hours earlier, I had traced the subtle threads Emily had left behind. A missed signature here, a misfiled document there, a wire transfer that didn't match the ledger by $12,485. Each misstep wasn't a mistake, it was a breadcrumb in her procedural game. I had waited patiently, documenting everything with meticulous care, never letting frustration creep into my tone, never letting my pulse betray me. The coffee in the corner of my office had gone cold, but I barely noticed. My laptop screen glowed softly, highlighting each line of metadata, each notarized waiver, each audit trail that Emily had underestimated. I opened her corporate emails, her financial statements, her trust documents, cross-referencing every detail. $14,625 transferred to a shell account under a name I hadn't seen in years. A legal trap laid for months, but one she had assumed I would never catch. I paused, listening to the soft hum of the city outside. My daughter's laughter echoed faintly from the living room. Her innocence anchored me to the calm I needed. Protecting her, shielding her future, this was the silent fire that drove every choice, and now, I had every piece aligned. Each document, each timestamp, each legal clause pointed to a singular, inevitable confrontation. The office door opened, and Emily stepped in, her posture immaculate, her expression carefully neutral. "Busy night?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I gestured toward the stack of files on the desk, casually, as though they were ordinary papers. "Just tying up loose ends," I said softly. Her eyes flickered to the folders, a microsecond of hesitation betraying her calm exterior. She smiled, thinly, almost imperceptibly. "You've been thorough," she murmured, voice even but distant. The room was charged with unspoken threats, and yet I didn't flinch. My patience had paid off. Her arrogance would be her undoing. I reached for the phone and dialed Karen Mitchell, my lawyer. "Everything's in place," I said calmly. There was a pause on the line, then Karen's low, approving hum. "This is airtight. Emily won't see it coming." I allowed myself the faintest nod. The first micro-twist had already landed: Emily's hidden accounts, her fabricated liabilities, her ally who had vanished without a trace. They were all exposed quietly, legally, and immutably. The next hours were a controlled flurry. Emails drafted, files encrypted, court notices scheduled. Each step was deliberate, patient, precise. Emily's world was starting to collapse, brick by brick, without me ever raising my voice or breaking protocol. My daughter came into the room at one point, tugging gently at my sleeve. I smiled, ruffled her hair, and whispered, "Almost done, sweetheart. Almost done." By afternoon, the courtroom was prepared. Judge Reynolds, a stern but fair figure I had cultivated trust with over months of procedural consultation, reviewed the documents. The waiver Emily had assumed would protect her, the hidden debts she had thought buried, each financial misstep, all now laid bare. The judge's brow furrowed as he glanced at the ledger, then at Emily. "This isn't a matter of emotion," he said, voice low, measured. "It's a matter of fact. And the facts speak clearly." Emily's confident composure began to crack. Every denial, every strategic pause she had rehearsed was met with calm, professional counterpoints. I observed silently, letting the law speak through my documentation. Micro-twist after micro-twist revealed her procedural miscalculations: a $5,230 misallocated transfer, a notarized contract missing signatures, a falsely claimed audit trail. Each revelation quieted the courtroom, not with drama, but with irrefutable truth. When the final document was presented, a comprehensive, cross-referenced report of all her actions, I felt a weight lift. The room remained calm, but the power dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Emily's eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, and I saw, finally, the realization of defeat. Not anger, not screaming, just acknowledgement that control had left her hands. Walking out of the courthouse later, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome sense of release. No triumphal gestures, no flashing headlines, just the quiet dignity of justice served. My daughter's hand in mine, her future secured, the oppressive weight of Emily's manipulations lifted. Back home, I locked the files in a secure cabinet, triple-checked encrypted backups, and sat by the window watching the city lights flicker. My phone buzzed, a message from Karen Mitchell, all set. "You did it, and it's clean." I allowed myself a small smile. Not rich, not extravagant, but free. Emotionally, mentally, and strategically unshackled. I whispered to my daughter, "We're safe now. Nothing can touch us." She smiled, completely unaware of the calculated storm that had passed around her. And that was exactly how it had to be: quiet victory, procedural mastery, future secured. Sitting back, I reflected on everything: the meticulous planning, the hidden debts uncovered, the silent micro-twists, the legal exposure, the calm observation that had kept me steps ahead. Each element of the plan had executed perfectly, without theatrics, without panic, without error. I didn't scream, I didn't yell, I orchestrated. And in the end, I won. The quiet evening settled around us. My daughter played in the corner, unaware of the battles fought on her behalf. My phone remained silent. The files secured. I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension dissolve. Justice wasn't flashy. It was precise, measured, and irrevocable. Emily had lost her control, her allies had vanished, and the law had spoken, calmly, professionally, and unassailably. I stood, collected the remaining documents, and locked them away. "I'm not rich," I murmured, "but I'm free." Freedom in its purest form, dignity preserved, child protected, antagonist facing consequences alone. Peace settled like a soft blanket over the chaos that had once threatened our lives. And for the first time in months, I allowed myself to simply breathe, knowing the storm had passed and that everything, truly everything, was finally under my control.